In the summer of 2025, a shadow fell over the eastern Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk. For weeks, artillery had thundered around its outskirts, drones prowled the skies, and civilians lived in the terrifying rhythm of air raid sirens. Pokrovsk is not just another dot on the map, it is a vital hub. A fortress city standing between Russia's army and the wider Ukrainian heartland. If Pokrovsk falls, entire supply lines unravel, towns east of the city are doomed, and Ukraine's defensive posture in Donbas weakens catastrophically. That is why Vladimir Putin has once again made Pokrovsk the centerpiece of his summer offensive. The stakes are immense, and both sides know it. The Russian advance toward Pokrovsk is part of a broader strategy that has been unfolding since early summer. Having failed in their initial blitzkrieg back in 2022, Russian forces shifted to attrition, a slow, grinding war meant to bleed Ukraine dry. Now, they strike along multiple fronts: the Oskol River, Toretsk, Zaporizhia, and of course, Pokrovsk. Their goal is not only to seize territory, but also to stretch Ukraine's already exhausted manpower. And all the while, missiles and drones slam into Ukrainian cities far from the front, terrorizing civilians and hoping to sap the nation's will to resist. July brought some of the heaviest air campaigns of the war. Russia deployed hundreds of Sheikh drones, with intelligence suggesting that production lines may soon allow Moscow to launch 1,000 or even 2,000 in a single day. For the families huddled in cellars as these drones buzz overhead, war is no longer something happening at the front. It has invaded their homes, their schools, and their daily lives. The intent is clear: frighten civilians, disrupt life, and create pressure on Kyiv to negotiate on Russia's terms. But the very fact that Pokrovsk remains standing, battered yet unbroken, speaks to the resilience that Putin has continually underestimated. On the ground, Russian forces have already captured a string of villages northeast of Pokrovsk, Koptiv, Novotoretsky, and pushed across the Kazini-Terez River. Their advance threatens Rodinsk and the TO-515 highway, a critical artery for Ukrainian reinforcements. Should that route fall, the nearby town of Murmurad would be virtually cut off, and Pokrovsk itself would rely solely on the E50 highway for survival. Encirclement would become a looming nightmare. Russian saboteurs even infiltrated Pokrovsk itself from the village of Zavirov in late July. Though they were swiftly destroyed, the attempt was reckless, but it underscored the reality. Russia is determined to choke this city into submission. Ukrainian commanders are painfully aware of the danger. They admit that manpower shortages plague the defense, worsened by a complicated transition from a brigade system to a corps structure. Coordination suffers, reserves are scarce, and a decisive counteroffensive looks increasingly unlikely. And so, the defenders of Pokrovsk brace themselves. They know the Russians are closing in from multiple directions. They know their supply routes are narrowing. And yet, they also know that if they yield, the consequences will ripple across all of Donbas. In this war, some battles are about more than ground. They are about survival itself. While Pokrovsk dominates the headlines, it is not the only battlefield drawing blood. Russia has adopted a deliberate strategy of attacking everywhere at once. Along the Oskol River, they have expanded their bridgehead, inching closer to the PO7 highway that sustains the Ukrainian stronghold of Kupiansk. Further south, they push westward from Udoken towards Zelenopol, a creeping advance that threatens the border of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast in Toretsk. After months of brutal fighting, Ukrainian forces have finally been forced to withdraw, ceding ground to relentless Russian assaults. Each of these moves on its own might seem modest. Together, they represent a dangerous pattern. Ukraine being forced to fight a war of attrition on Moscow's terms. The situation is particularly alarming in the Toretsk-Konstantinivka sector. This region forms part of Ukraine's so-called Donbas fortress belt, a line of defensive towns meant to anchor the defense of eastern Ukraine. By capturing villages such as Yablonivka, the fall of Toretsk is a bitter blow, the culmination of long months of bloody combat. And while Ukraine has made Russia pay dearly in lives and equipment for every advance, the fact remains: the enemy is still advancing. Even small gains add up, and they force Ukraine to spread its defenders thinner and thinner. Further south, the Zaporizhia front once again ignited in July. At first, observers feared a full-scale offensive was underway, but the attacks proved more localized tactical assaults designed not to break through but to draw Ukrainian reinforcements away from Pokrovsk and the Oskol. Russia's capture of Kamyansky on July 8 was the lone tangible result. Yet the pressure achieved its purpose. Ukrainian commanders now face impossible choices: where to send reinforcements, which supply routes to protect. Every decision comes at the expense of another front. And in this type of war, hesitation can be fatal. The Sumy region tells another story. Russian Marines from the 40th and 155th Brigades had advanced rapidly earlier in the summer, raising fears of a new breakthrough. But here, Ukraine fought back fiercely, inflicting heavy losses and reclaiming Kyiv. The offensive has since stalled. The situation mirrors Russia's second Kharkov offensive initial success, followed by exhaustion and reversal. For Ukraine, this provides some hope, proof that Russian momentum is not unstoppable. But across the wider map, the overall pattern remains grim. Steady Russian pressure in multiple places, constant drone and missile strikes, and Ukrainian manpower stretched thin. Western estimates tell the human cost of this strategy. Since May, some 31,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, and by Washington's count, 100,000 have died since the start of 2025. These are staggering losses for what are often only minor territorial gains. Yet for Putin, even meager progress matters. He seeks not only land, but also the perception of inevitability that Russia can grind down Ukraine by sheer persistence, no matter the cost. For Ukraine, the challenge is survival against an opponent willing to throw lives into the fire for every inch of earth. And survival, at least for now, depends on help from the outside world. Behind the clash of tanks and artillery lies another struggle: the silent war of economies. Russia's economy has so far weathered Western sanctions better than many predicted, buoyed by vast oil reserves and creative rerouting of trade through Asia and the Middle East. But signs of strain are emerging. Putin has already hinted at reduced defense spending in 2026. His economy minister, Maxim Reshetnikov, warns of looming recession. Banks whisper of bailouts, and civilian industries are withering as resources are funneled into the military machine. For ordinary Russians, the costs of war are mounting, even if the state hides them behind patriotic rhetoric. Meanwhile, Ukraine's survival hinges on foreign lifelines. Early July brought troubling news when Washington announced a pause in arms shipments to Kyiv, citing the need to rebuild American stockpiles. It was a devastating signal, one that raised fears of abandonment. But within days, everything changed. Donald Trump, angered by relentless Russian airstrikes, made a dramatic U-turn. On July 10th, he declared that weapons would once again flow to Ukraine, but this time through NATO, with allies footing the bill. Within a week, he went further, promising 17 Patriot air defense systems, billions in military supplies, and even threatening crushing tariffs on Russia's trade partners if Putin did not end the war within weeks. By late July, Trump had escalated even more, vowing penalties on India for buying Russian oil and weapons, while the EU unveiled its 18th sanctions package, lowering the oil price cap and targeting Russia's shadow fleet. These moves mark a new phase of the economic war. If Washington and Brussels can truly cut off Russia's oil revenues, the Kremlin's ability to sustain its war machine will erode. Yet Russia has proved remarkably adaptable, finding buyers in China, India, and beyond. Trump's threats are designed to break those relationships, to isolate Moscow economically, as well as to whether such pressure will succeed is uncertain. What is clear is that both sides now see the war not only in terms of soldiers and territory, but in terms of economies, trade routes, and industrial capacity. For Ukraine, the revival of US support has been a lifeline. Patriot systems are desperately needed to shield cities from Russian missiles. Investments in Ukraine's drone industry offer the promise of homegrown defenses against shade swarms. Deals with Germany, Britain, Denmark, Canada, and others funnel resources directly into Ukrainian arms production. In effect, Ukraine's defense industry is becoming an extension of Europe's. It is a remarkable transformation, a country at war building not only to survive, but to innovate. If Russia hoped sanctions would fracture Ukraine's supporters, the opposite may be happening. The West, jolted by the scale of Russia's attacks, appears more determined than ever to sustain Kyiv's resistance. War does not only test armies, it tests societies. In July, Ukraine faced a political crisis of its own making. The parliament passed a law bringing independent anti-corruption agencies under direct government supervision, citing wartime security needs. For many Ukrainians, this was a betrayal. Tens of thousands poured into the streets, staging the largest protest since the invasion began. They feared a slide into authoritarianism, a sacrifice of democracy on the altar of survival. And, remarkably, their voices prevailed. President Zelensky reversed the decision within days, bowing to public pressure at a time when most wartime leaders would have doubled down. This moment matters. It shows that even under bombardment, Ukrainians are unwilling to surrender the values they are fighting for. They are not merely resisting invasion. They are defending the principles of accountability, freedom, and democracy. In a sense, these protests are as important as any battle in Donbas. They remind the world that Ukraine's fight is not only against tanks and drones, but against the very idea that might makes right, that democracy can be extinguished by force. On the battlefield, meanwhile, the human cost grows heavier by the day. Russia has lost more than 4,000 tanks and 10,000 vehicles, along with thousands of artillery systems, aircraft, and helicopters. Ukraine's losses are smaller but severe: over 1,200 tanks, nearly 5,000 vehicles, and a substantial portion of its air fleet. Behind each statistic are families shattered, communities grieving, and soldiers making the ultimate sacrifice. Putin wagers that Ukraine's spirit will break before Russia's resources run dry. But so far, he has misjudged his opponent. Ukrainians continue to rebuild, to adapt, and to resist, sustained by allies abroad and determination at home. Every city under fire, every drone intercepted, every protest against corruption reflects a single truth. This war is not just about lines on a map. It is about whether Ukraine can remain a free nation, and that truth gives ordinary Ukrainians a strength that no bombardment has yet erased. As July gives way to August, Pokrovsk remains the focal point of Russia's summer offensive. Encircled from multiple directions, its supply lines under threat, and its defenders stretched to the limit, the city stands as both target and symbol. For Russia, capturing Pokrovsk would demonstrate that their costly war of attrition can still yield significant rewards. For Ukraine, holding it would prove once more that resilience and foreign support can blunt even the fiercest assaults. The outcome of this battle may well shape the war's trajectory for months to come. Beyond the trenches and artillery duels, the war is also shifting in character. Drones, sanctions, and economic pressure now matter as much as tanks and soldiers. Western aid, once uncertain, is flowing again in unprecedented volumes. European states are not only donating weapons, but financing Ukrainian production, tying their own security to Kyiv's survival. At the same time, Russia's economy creaks under sanctions, while its military bleeds tens of thousands of men for modest gains. Yet for all its losses, the Kremlin shows no sign of stopping. Putin is determined to win something decisive this year, no matter the cost. For the rest of the world, the war in Ukraine is more than a regional conflict. It is a test of whether aggression and terror can still redraw borders in the 21st century. Each drone strike on Kyiv, each battle in Donbas, and each protest in the streets of Ukraine speaks to a struggle far larger than Pokrovsk alone. It is a struggle over the principles that define the modern world: sovereignty, freedom, and the rule of law. And so, as Pokrovsk braces for the storm, the question remains: will Russia's relentless offensive finally break through? Or will Ukraine, armed with new weapons, resilient people, and the support of its allies, stand its ground once more? The answer is still unwritten. But history is watching, and so are we. If you want to follow this story as it unfolds, make sure you subscribe, like, and share this video. And tell us in the comments, do you believe Russia's strategy of attrition can succeed? Or is Putin overreaching yet again? This is Kings and Generals, and we'll see you on the next one.